A great deal of reluctance and some trepidation that I turn the podium over to past President Jody Keller to introduce our speaker.
President Al, fellow Rotarians and guests, although you are accustomed to me telling bad jokes, today's topic sets a very serious tone, so we will forego that. I'm here to introduce our speaker, Kristen Woolley. But before I do that, I just want to tell you a little bit about her and certainly about my coming to meet her. Before I had met Kristen, I knew very little about the subject of childhood sexual abuse. But like many others, I learned more of this unspeakable topic in the news. As a proud Penn Stater and member of the Second Mile Board, I was horrified, disgusted, bewildered. A well-known hero, a beloved person I had come to know, I trusted, admired, supported, and endorsed, was a sexual predator. Child abuse suddenly burst into the headlines. It heated up the social media, became part of the discussion in living rooms all over the country. How could this have happened in Happy Valley? Not long after the Jerry Sandusky ordeal became the top story on nightly news, I was invited to visit a new counseling center, Turning Point, to meet Kristen Woolley, the founder. I agreed to schedule a meeting, but promised myself I wouldn't take on another volunteer activity. I thought, I'll stop in, I'll meet Kristen, have a brief meeting, and be on my way in 45 minutes, maybe an hour tops. Well, 2.5 hours later, I walked out of this peaceful, lovely oasis, Turning Point Counseling and Advocacy Center, enlightened and vividly aware of the terrible problem of childhood sexual abuse and its lasting effects on grown men and women. I became a board member at Turning Point less than a month later, and the chairman of the board 3 months after that. Kristen Woolley is the founder and clinical director of Turning Point. She was the victim of sexual abuse as a child, and now she is a survivor. No, she is a champion. She has channeled unimaginable evil into something good. A center where women who were sexually abused as girls can finally come to heal. Kristen is a remarkable woman. She's resilient, she's devoted, and optimistic. Her intense resolve to stop predators from preying on our precious children and grandchildren is steadfast. She's truly unlike anyone I've ever known. Kristen possesses the academic credentials to make her abundantly qualified for her field. She has a BS in nursing from WVU, a master's in social work from the University of Maryland, and licenses in both nursing and social work. But more importantly, she's a fierce advocate for those who cannot or are not yet ready to speak of their personal horrors of child abuse. I'm honored to introduce our speaker today, Kristen Woolley.
Good afternoon. Thank you. I promise I won't keep you here for 2.5 hours. So thank you. I'm going to move this up a little bit. So Jody, thank you for the kind introduction. Thank you for joining me in my pledge to fight against child sexual abuse. And thank you for being our board president. Also wish to thank Jane Schuessler. Jane joined our board also. Again, I had a long conversation with Jane and she was steadfast she's not joining. And probably an hour and a half later, she's like, so thank you for your service to our board. And I also wish to thank Dr. Christine Heine, who just recently joined our mission as well. Thank you. I'd like to thank the York Bar Association for their support. The flyers on the table have been made possible by a grant from them, so I wish to thank them as well. And I also wish to thank the Rotary Committee for the honor of speaking here today on this subject that's very, very near and dear to my heart. And I'd like to thank each one of you for your willingness to attend and hear my words. I appreciate it. I stand before you to talk about a difficult topic. It makes each of us wrestle internally, leaves us uncomfortable, and sadly it leaves us with more questions than answers. I stand before you with the goal of hopefully helping you understand the prevalence and the reality of sexual abuse, how it manifests itself well into adulthood, and ways that hopefully you can be proactive in empowering yourself and most importantly to protect our children. Child sexual abuse is an epidemic. And when I say epidemic, I want to say a few statistics to you. Leukemia will affect 1 in 29,000 children. Type 1 diabetes will affect 1 in 400 children. Autism will affect 1 in 110 children. Child sexual abuse is going to affect 1 in 10 before their 18th birthday. That equates to 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys. It's happening every day, right here in our community. I stand before you and I'm going to speak from 2 lenses. First lens is a survivor of sexual abuse, and the second lens is as a therapist. And those roles are going to overlap as I speak. I don't know how to separate them. I'm going to share my story. I'm not a fancy speechwriter, I'm not a professional speaker. I only know to do one thing and speak from my heart, and that's what I hope to do today. And I'll tell you, if someone told me a decade ago I'd be standing in this room in front of 250 people talking about child sexual abuse, I would tell them they have the wrong person. So, I'd like to share with you a small part of my story. And when I say small, anyone who knows me in this room personally knows that I often joke that my family had so much dysfunction, we could have starred on the Jerry Springer show every day for a full year. It would have been a hit. I mean, I grew up in a small town north of Harrisburg, kind of like a Mayberry field. Very, very small. Everyone knew each other. From the outside, we appeared like we were the perfect family. My father was a local town physician. My mother was his office manager, a nurse beside him. Everything looked perfect if you looked from the outside in. But on the inside, it was a completely different story. My family's life was defined by domestic violence. From a very early age, I learned a crash course in 2 important lessons. I learned the silent rules of domestic violence. I knew exactly what to say, how to say it, when to remain quiet, how to avoid conflict, how to play the game to avoid the wrath of my father's fists. And I also learned the sad reality of mental health issues and addiction. My sister, my oldest sister, was 6 years older, was riddled with mental health, depression, as well as addiction early in her teen years. And my father's way of dealing with her illness, instead of being compassionate, he chose to knock some sense into her. And my mother's role was to protect my sister, and often that also meant she was being beaten in the same process. So that was my template. The outside, we were looking at family, and the inside was very, very different. So I knew how to be a good kid, a good student, be the good doctor's daughter. And behind closed doors, I knew how to be quiet, be the wallflower, and to toe the line. Which leads me to the story of my abuse. My childhood, as I knew it, came to an abrupt halt one fall, cold, rainy day in 1980. I was 10 years old. I was being cared for by a friend of the family. It was a man who was 12 years older than me. He presented himself as a big brother figure. He helped my mom by taking me to various after-school activities. He taught me how to fish, took me camping. He was filling in that role with the father figure that I didn't have. But this man had one goal in mind, and that was to groom me, to be his next victim. So on that cold fall day, my world stopped. My childhood as I knew it came to an abrupt stop. And that big brother figure began to sexually molest me, which went on for 2 very, very long years. Many people have asked me, why didn't you speak up, Kristen? Why did it go on so long and you didn't tell anyone? And then often it's followed by, why don't children speak up? There's a price tag that comes along when you speak your truth. And remember, we ask those questions from the adult perspective, and we forget of thinking it from the child's perspective, or why they don't speak out. It takes a lot of courage to echo your words, a lot of courage to echo the ugly truth of abuse. There's so much shame and guilt. It overcomes you, it becomes your template. Your innocence is stolen. You're forever thrusted into two worlds, the adult world and the child world. And you have to learn those new set of rules. And the fear is, will someone believe you? Will it stop? And most importantly, are you going to be blamed? Is it your fault? As the flyer notes on the table, it's not strangers that are touching our children. Less than 10% of all violations is by a stranger. 30% of all violations are by family members. 40% is by a trusted adult in a child's life. It could be a friend of the family like it was for me. It could be a coach, a teacher, a clergy person. But back to the original question, why didn't I speak up? I made a conscious decision on that day in 1980 that I would remain quiet. And literally my thinking was this: my father's going to kill me. My mother's plate was already overflowing with taking care of my sister, and I did not want to add one more thing to her, and then she had to try to protect me too. And if those two factors weren't enough, my main driving force was in my family, there was no boundaries. Again, we grew up in a small community. My father told everyone in the community what my sister was doing. So I knew if I spoke my truth, my classmates, my 4th, 5th, and 6th grade friends would know my truth. And that humiliation was worse than enduring it several times a week for 2 years. I chose silence. But the effects of abuse do not go away. When you're abused, the only weapon you have to protect you is your mind. And our mind's amazing. It protects us. And sometimes it shuts it off and repressed memories occur, and sometimes you have a photographic memory. I have a photographic memory. I know exactly what's happened to me every day. I can see it. And I've had to learn how to hold that, hold those triggers, hold those flashbacks. And often you're not able to even talk about it till well into adulthood until you're finally safe and understand what happened to you. The effects of sexual abuse can be numerous: depression, anxiety, eating disorders, self-mutilation, problems with intimacy, addiction issues. For me, my abuse came out in devastating panic and anxiety attacks. I did not understand at the time what was occurring. I was newly married, I was 23 years old, I was working as an emergency department nurse. I sought help and counseling for my anxiety, and that's when my ugly truth came out in that counseling time. And I learned one really, really important lesson in that time in my life that I now factor into the approach that I take when I work with clients. I learned from that tiny bit of counseling I had in my early 20s, the client must always be in control of when they speak their truth, and most importantly, to whom they speak their truth. The therapist at the time I was working with pushed me to tell my mother. I didn't want to tell my mother. She kept saying, you need to tell your mother. I didn't want to. I was afraid to tell my mother. I still had a 10-year-old who's playing in my head, I'm going to break my mother. But who was I? I just had a bachelor's degree. She had a PhD. I was trained to not question authority, trained to quiet my intuition. So I did that. I reluctantly told my mother. And it wasn't the hallmark moment I was looking for. I didn't ever fear my mother would believe me. I just didn't want my mother to know the truth. I didn't want to add to her. My mother did believe me, and she was angry, really angry at my perpetrator. She trusted him. She thought I was safe. She thought she was protecting me. 2 weeks later, my mother and I saw each other for a very, very brief moment, about 10 minutes. And in that 10 minutes, she said to me, Kristen, I thought about what you shared with me. And your story made me remember that I too was sexually abused as a child. I stood there in silence. I gave my mother her memory back. Exactly 10 days later, my mother died of a heart attack at age 57. And did I think I broke my mother? The 10-year-old fear came true? Absolutely. So I packed it up and I began a journey of grief. Moved on. Went back to school, got my master's in social work, and as I was finishing up my second degree, I realized I'm a mandated reporter now under 2 licenses. So I chose at age 25 to report my interviews, and that's when I learned I lost all of my criminal rights at age 23. So what do? You pack it up again and you move on. I became a mother, I focused on my family, raising my sons, moving on with life. But as I noted, the effects of sexual abuse do not go away. They stay. Trauma is an injury, and you need to heal from it. And it's when you work on it, it's like peeling back layers. And each different times in your life, a different layer can appeal, and you need to appear, you need to peel it back. So for me, the next layer came almost 7 years ago. Almost 7 years ago to this day, to be honest with you. When my oldest son, Ethan, he had turned just 10 years old. And I leaned down one night and I gave him a kiss, tucked him into bed. And that's when I saw for the first time how truly small, innocent, and precious a 10-year-old is. And that's when I knew I had more work to do. I knew intellectually my abuse was not my fault. But in my heart, if I got really honest with each one of you, it was still my fault. So I had a trained therapist, took the client seat again. And in that healing process, the vision and the concept of creating Turning Point began. And the reason I found a turning point, because as I was working on my abuse, it was so isolating. It was so overwhelming. I just wanted to speak to one person who got it, but people don't talk about being survivors of sexual abuse. It's not like you can pick up the phone and say, hey, let's talk about this. So I wanted to find a place where we could share the same language, a place where someone could be free of their shame and their guilt. So the idea of Turning Point began. And if anybody else knows me in this building, in this room, I want to rescue everybody. I wanted a turning point for men, for women, for children. Sexual abuse affects everyone. It affects men too. They were little boys too. They were innocent. But I took a piece of advice from someone that I valued from my early 20s, and he had told me a very, very important lesson. Start small and do it really, really well. So I did. I'm a woman. I survived sexual abuse. I know how to heal from it, so I started there. So the Center for Safety, the Center for Healing was begun. When you are violated, you really do believe in your heart you don't matter. And it's a long process to believe and switch that you do matter. So I set out with that goal, hoping that one woman could leave her shame at our doorstep and move forward feeling free. My mother died not knowing that she mattered. No one should ever leave this earth not knowing they have value and worth. I believe in breaking the silence and educating, advocating. I chose to do a nonprofit. It was not an easy journey. A lot of people thought I was crazy. Why not just open up a private counseling center? But education advocacy is important to me. Like another breaking the silence. Our community needs it. So this idea began. My startup money was seed money that I inherited from my mother. I put my heart, soul, and checkbook into the idea. I began working on the concept for 2 solid years. I met with many community members. Some of them are sitting here today. They helped me, and I thank them. And as I'm working on the building, and meeting with attorneys and meeting with accountants and learning all kinds of language that I didn't understand at the moment, I started to work realizing as I physically painted each room in the building that I had to create an environment of safety. If you do not feel safe, you cannot heal from sexual abuse. In November 2012, we opened our doors, and the center that I envisioned, a place where women could tell their stories in a safe, non-judgmental, nurturing environment, was born. There was no other organization in New York like Turning Point. We focus specifically only on helping adult women, and we just opened our mission to teen girls who endured childhood sexual abuse. We have 5 staff members that are highly trained in trauma. We offer individual therapy, art therapy, music therapy, sanitary therapy. We also offer groups in each one of those therapies. The reason we offer experiential therapies is research has shown us that trauma is locked in the right side of the brain. And if you can tap into that with experiential therapies, you help to bring it over to the left side and process it. You often can't identify and say what is going on with you with feelings, but those modalities help to open it up. And as I noted, our mission is very, very specific. Women and children who were sexually abused. We do get calls from women who were raped. We refer them to the Victim Assistance Center. And often rape and child sexual abuse go hand in hand, but when someone's raped, that's a crisis. And they need our wonderful Victim Assistance Center. So we work collaboratively for making sure the appropriate referrals are given. Private clinicians who are therapists in the community work with us. They refer their clients and we work in tandem to help their client heal. Referral sources, in addition to psychological practices, come from family physicians and gynecology specifically. We also receive referrals from clergy and also the district attorney's office. Two common questions I'm often asked is, how long does healing take? And when do you know that treatment is really successful? I know that treatment's being successful when a woman can shift her mindset from being a victim to a survivor. And just like everyone's story is different, their timeline of healing is different. Often when a woman comes in our building, she can't even look us in the eyes. And I keep telling them when they come in, they're only 51% of the way there because they walked in our door. They already admitted they were sexually abused as a child. That's the key piece, the starting point. Again, our treatment approach is the client must be in control of their journey. When you're robbed, control it. When you are violated, control is robbed of you. And it's important to let that client know that they truly are the experts of themselves. All that gets quieted. You have no idea who you are after you're abused. And learning that you can survive and you can move forward is what our goal is. And it's not really their fault. They really believe it in their heart. And when that transition and that mindset is happening, that's when we're on the path of truly healing. Regarding education and advocacy, we started a campaign, I Found My Voice. As you see, there's boards around, and there's a little bit of the flyers on your table. You may have seen our billboards in the community. We also have newspaper ads, and we're soon going to be doing the public service announcements with Fox 43. The reason for that campaign is twofold. One, to let women know who are out there right now that have never talked about their abuse that healing is possible. And also to let the community know it goes on for a long time. People do not talk about sexual abuse well into their 40s and 50s. Actually, the average age of disclosure is 42. Currently in America, there's 39 million survivors of child sexual abuse today. With advocacy, we work hard with legislators. There's two bills that we currently are supporting. Representative Mark Rodley's bill, House Bill 2067, This bill addresses statute of limitation reform. As I noted, I have no criminal or civil rights. My perpetrator continues. I know 8 victims that he has to this day. At one point, he worked in a school as a middle school janitor. And as I just said, research shows us that people don't talk about this till their 40s or 50s, and usually they come forward because they're scared of a child being violated. So this bill opens up a 2-year civil window. It was proposed in 2006, and it has sat with the Judiciary Committee since that time, and they will not put it forward to be voted on. Several other states have adopted the statute of limitation reform. California opens a window for just 1 year. Over 1,200 people came forward, and 300 perpetrators were identified. Perpetrators do not stop. 70% of perpetrators have 1 to 9 victims, 20% have 10 to 40 victims, and 0 perpetrators have over 400 victims. Where there's children, there's predators. Another bill that we're working hard to support is United States Senator Pat Toomey's bill. It's called Protecting Children from Predators Act. This bill would require background checks for all teachers, school employees, and independent contractors. It would be their background checks would be housed in a federal database, and it would avoid what they call passing the trash. It's when a teacher has been investigated for sexual misconduct, that they get moved over to another school district and they don't know. Last year, 459 teachers were arrested for sexual assault on children. That's more than 1 child per day. Pennsylvania ranks 2nd in our nation for sexual school assault investigations. Last year, 26 teachers were arrested for sexually violating a child. And what's worse is we do know these numbers are underestimated. Children do not come forward. Senator Pat Toomey's legislation passed unanimously in Congress and is now before Senate waiting a vote. Again, as I said, anywhere there's children that gather, there's predators, including cyberspace. More than 50,000 sexual predators are online at any given moment. Chat rooms offer advanced and immediate communication. And sexual predators can take advantage of this method to recruit children into sexually illicit relationships. Okay. Sexual abuse is a really heavy subject. I know it makes people uncomfortable. I really appreciate your attentiveness today. I want to close by saying this. I consider myself really, really fortunate. My journey has led me to do this work that I really believe I was meant to do. To help other women who were sexually abused as children to find their voice. If someone in your life is affected by sexual abuse and chooses to disclose to you, please know it takes tremendous courage, and you might not know what to say to them, but just simply offering them the support is priceless. Less than 2% of all abuse allegations are false. And with the staggering statistic that I noted, each and every one who sits here today is touched by it in some way, all genders. It's affecting your grandmothers, your grandfathers, your mothers, your fathers, your wives and your husbands, your daughters and your sons, your granddaughters and your grandsons. No one is immune to child sexual abuse. I encourage you to learn more, understand the risks that face our children, seek ways to protect them, and educate them. And if an adult discloses to you, give them the same gift I received. Support, being believed, and most importantly, being believed. I sincerely thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to share my personal story and what turning around our community. Thank you.